I am Dr. DeAun Nelson, a naturopathic physician practicing weight-independent healthcare. I invite medical professionals to listen as I discuss how shifting the focus off of weight in healthcare can greatly improve health outcomes for patients of all sizes. I will explore what it means to practice in a weight-inclusive paradigm and discuss tools to implement these ideas in practice. Keep in mind that the information I will present may be new to many of my listeners and may sound radical to some, but stick with me. This information could change the lives of your patients. I would like to introduce Dr. May. Michelle May is an MD who is a recovered yo-yo dieter and the founder of Am I Hungry? Mindful Eating Programs and Training, which can be found at www.amihungry.com. Am I Hungry helps individuals resolve mindless and emotional eating and senseless yo-yo dieting to live the vibrant life they crave. Over 800 health and wellness professionals from 30 countries have been trained to facilitate Am I Hungry? Mindful eating programs worldwide. Dr. May is also the award-winning author of the Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat book series. And in fact, I did interview her co-author, Migret Fletcher, as well, so you can listen to both episodes and get the whole set. Hi, and I'd like to welcome Michelle May. I'm so excited to hear you today. And I guess we'll start off with my usual question is wanting to find out how you got into weight neutral healthcare and the whole HAES world. And I know you do a lot of work around mindful eating and have several books that we'll talk about as we go. So I wanted to find out how you kind of got into that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a family physician by training, and I had, by the time I started my work in mindful eating, I was already probably 10 years or so into my practice, maybe a little less than that. But that whole time, actually, from the time I was in high school, I'd been struggling myself with yo-yo dieting and body image challenges and some disordered eating. And so when I finally figured out that for me, a lot of the source of the problem was this constant obsession with weight and trying to reach that thin ideal. And of course, chronic dieting, which was always yo yo dieting and weight
Right.
cycling. I guess I just became really passionate about the freedom that I felt when I finally resolved all of that, and then wanting to share that with my patients and to help other clinicians who were struggling, to help their patients to really just approach this from a completely different way. Now, initially, I was doing what I called, and I'll use air quotes, non-diet weight management. I wasn't promoting weight loss. That really wasn't a big focus. And I think I kind of justified it by saying, well, even if we're not promoting weight loss, this is a different way of managing your weight. But the longer I did the work and the more people I worked with, the more I really began to understand that the underlying issue with yo-yo dieting and of course many of our other health problems is really this obsession with changing our weight. And so when that became crystal clear to me, we moved to a weight neutral stance and did the best we could to remove references to weight from all of our books and our web pages and things like that, although I still occasionally am appalled to come across something that I wrote or recorded years ago. I mean, it's a process,
It is.
it takes a long time to make that shift.
Yeah, it really does. And I kind of wish we would all give each other just a little bit of a break sometimes
Yeah, I think we
as we
need to
get
be
better.
gentle. Yeah, we need to be gentle with each other. I mean, it is a process, and it's such a shift because our culture, particularly healthcare, is so weight focused that
Hmm.
at first it's kind of like, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean? It's
Right.
kind of it's sort of the experience I had when I first started my work in mindful eating, and my first book proposal the subtitle was "What to Do When Diets Don't Work," and I got 17 rejection letters, and many of them said, "What do you mean diets don't work? People don't want to hear this. Aren't you going to tell them what to eat?" And I was like, "No," because it takes time to shift a culture's viewpoint on health and on any other deeply embedded beliefs, especially when there's so much bias attached to it. And for
Yeah.
people to change their beliefs really requires them to say, gosh, I was wrong. And I might have actually even harmed people because I was wrong. And I had to do that myself. I wrote several blog posts and other, social media things around the idea that I had made a mistake and that I was apologetic for it. I had to, rewrite a couple of my books. And, at the time I thought, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal because I was never promoting weight loss anyway. But once your eyes are open to the harm of this weight focus, I couldn't believe how many subtle mentions or references were in my earlier work that I had to go back and scrub clean. It was really quite humbling.
Yeah, it comes back to that internal weight bias, right, that we all have,
Mhm.
and I know I've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast, and believe me, I will not stop talking about it. But we're so used to it that we don't consider it, and when you start
Right.
seeing it everywhere,
Mhm.
not just in medicine, but just everywhere,
Well, that's
it's
right, right?
pretty
Yeah, your eyes
awful.
are open. It's everywhere. It's
Yeah.
everywhere, and we can start to write. That phrase "implicit bias" is so
Hmm.
important because it's implicit. We don't know that it's there, and so a lot of times people will get defensive about it or deny that they have bias, and that's completely understandable. But this bias is so deeply embedded that we just don't recognize it until we do.
Right. And even once you recognize it, sometimes it can be really challenging not to to change your language, to really consciously make a difference and make an effort to change how you're thinking about the world. Yeah, I've even found that, and I was on board from the get go. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important work, it's hard work, and it's so worthwhile that I think, the difficulties and the process is definitely worth the effort.
yeah. Let's see. We can talk about your books next. I read the have the mindful. I'm sorry, I'm going to get the title wrong.
Eat
Um,
what you love what you eat.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
no
erase that bit.
problem.
Yeah, the eat what you love what you eat with diabetes. And I did get the second version, not the
Good,
the original.
good.
Uh,
Yeah, so what she's referring to, everybody, is we have Eat What You Love What You Eat with Diabetes. And if you get that book, please make sure you get the version that says updated on the front. The other one was outdated. The publisher didn't want to release a second edition, so some of the diabetes information was outdated. And of course, the changes to the weight neutral stance were really significant in my view. They're very subtle, and you might not notice them unless you've done this work yourself.
mhm.
But I think the changes are significant, and I just, I wish I could take all the other ones off the market. But
There's
to
only
get
so
the one
much you
that
can
says
do.
updated on the cover, the second edition.
Well, so I actually really enjoyed it, and I actually talked to your co-author, Migret Fletcher, on an earlier podcast,
Hmm.
and we dug into the whole diabetes part, so we don't need to do that necessarily. But I wanted to note that you also that is actually a series of books, and you have some subtypes, or so like the diabetes. I believe you have one on binge eating and one on bariatric surgery
Yeah,
patients.
well, yeah,
And
sort of.
were there any other
Yeah,
sub ones?
so Eat What You Love What You Eat. The main one was the first book
Right.
in the series, and that was really for people who were just struggling with, I call it the eat, repent, repeat cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. So, sort of that diet, that yo-yo dieting issue. And so that book was really designed for anybody who's trying to adopt a healthier lifestyle. And I'm even kind of, I've even in that updated version of that moved away from the idea of a healthier lifestyle, because that in and of itself has become sort of loaded term these days. It seems like people
Yeah.
just want to glom on to any opportunity to judge other people and set the bar higher and all of that. So it's really just about how to free yourself up from obsession with food and dieting and weight, and really move toward making choices that feel good in your body in the present moment, which is, after all, what mindfulness is all about. And so that book, we developed something, I developed a model called the mindful eating cycle to give people a little bit of structure, because I think one of the things people struggle with when they stop dieting is, well, then how do I make decisions about food? And once we've lost that natural ability to do that without following a bunch of rules, it is kind of confusing. And so the mindful eating cycle is definitely not rules. It's just some structure for thinking through your eating decisions. So, just real briefly, it's why do I eat? When do I feel like eating? What do I eat? How do I eat it? How much of it do I eat? And where do I invest my energy? So it allows us to look at our decisions at any moment in time, and also to reflect back on things that didn't go well, to start to learn more about ourselves, and, why we eat, and, how we feel, and how we feel and what we eat, and, all of this complex interaction with food, with the intention of eating becoming a very natural process again, something that I think many people don't feel is very natural at all. That mindful eating
Agree.
cycle was so, yeah, right. So
Yeah.
that mindful eating cycle was so helpful in teaching that we adapted it for diabetes, for the treatment of binge eating disorder. And I also wrote a version for students, and I'm working on
Excellent.
one for athletes. The one for bariatric, I haven't written Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat for bariatric surgery
Oh, maybe it
yet.
was a program on your website.
Yeah, it's a workbook. It's a
Okay.
workbook. It's a companion workbook. Yeah,
Okay.
because,
That's what it was.
a lot of people who've had bariatric surgery or are considering bariatric surgery have really never tried anything but various diets, all kinds of different diets. And so many of them may believe that the surgery is their only option, or at least they're being
Mhm.
told by their doctor that it's their only option. And so we really wanted to take a look at this from the perspective, from a weight neutral perspective of, hey, what is it that you're really considering bariatric surgery for? Or if you've already had it and you realize that it didn't solve all of your problems, what was it that you were hoping it would do for you? Because a weight neutral, mindfulness based approach can allow people to begin to live their lives fully in the body that they have right now, and
Yes.
not continuously postpone their life until they reach some arbitrary weight goal that gives them permission to be happy or healthy.
Yeah, exactly. This is something I think about all the time, the postponing of life
Mm-hmm.
until you fit a certain externally conceived notion of what your
Mm-hmm.
body should look like. Cuz like we may think that it's an internal thing that we've decided, but really it's not. It's the world telling us what we should be and what we should look like and what our health should look like. We brought up earlier the idea of health being uh, its own issue, like it's
Mm-hmm.
its own problematic thing, because we started saying, oh, well, thin is healthy. And then we were like, oh, well, we can't say that anymore. So we'll just say healthy. But really, we're just coding for thin.
Right.
And I think that this goes for, not just clothes, or the how people look on the outside when they're running around doing their own thing, but also what is expected in their doctor's office, and uh, what is expected for them to get the care that they need. And so maybe, if they're in a larger body, they're told, oh, well, you need to be smaller, so let's go ahead and do this surgery, or this extreme diet, or whatever, to make you
Hmm.
thinner so that you're healthier. But in the
Hmm.
end, it does not necessarily make you healthier.
No,
Um,
absolutely not. In fact, many of the behaviors that would, maybe you'd be complimented for by your friends or your healthcare practitioner are the same kinds of behaviors that people who have a restrictive eating disorder would be treated for. It's
mhm,
kind of ironic that our cultural obsession with weighing, measuring, and counting food and stepping on the scale all the time, that doesn't really equate to health. And I think,
mm-mm,
many people who might fit the healthcare or social definition of healthy looking, indeed aren't practicing healthy behaviors at all. And again, there's that word healthy, right? They may
mm,
be restricting or depriving, or they may not be paying any attention at all. And they may not be moving their body, or they may not be making choices that are necessarily in the long run, going to be beneficial. But I think, again, our culture has sort of transferred this, well, it maybe it's politically incorrect to expect everybody to be thin, so now we have to expect everybody to be healthy. There's so much
right.
healthism in our culture as well as weightism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was just actually talking to uh, Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani, who does a lot of work around
Mm-hmm.
eating disorders, and we were just talking about the idea that if somebody in a larger body is, doing restrictive eating behaviors, or even purging eating behaviors, then if they're losing weight, they're told, excellent, keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, it's healthy for you, which, of course,
Mm.
not eating is not healthy for anyone,
Or sustainable,
or sustainable. Right.
right, right. Well,
Right.
and I think that's really, for me, that's where my passion comes from. Is it's this idea that um, we've got this external measure of beauty, of health, of even success, yet it doesn't align with the experience that many of us have had in our bodies. And I think,
Hmm.
in fact, many people have become disconnected from their own innate body wisdom about how to manage their eating and how to move their body in a joyful way. It's become a gigantic math problem. And for most of us, it's just not sustainable. I mean, for most of us, the guilt and the shame that accompany the inevitable failure it's really a vicious cycle. And I think it's very distracting. Unfortunately, I think women are disproportionately affected, though, certainly men deal with these issues as well. But I wonder sometimes what we as women could accomplish if we weren't so darn focused on, trying to attain some thin ideal.
Yeah.
I think it's really problematic, and I think it's time for our culture to begin to look at the harm that this is causing.
Absolutely. And I feel like even beyond that, worrying about what we're eating all of the time,
Hmm.
I mean, it just, even if even if it's trying to be healthy all of the time, right? So it's
Hmm.
not necessarily restricting, for looks, but I feel like when we're worried about that all the time, we're using brain space that we could be using for, so many other
Hmm.
amazing things.
Right.
And then we also kind of lose enjoyment of food, I think,
Hmm.
which to me is, it's very sad. I keep looking forward, into the holiday season, and I'm already starting to see, how to get through the holiday season, how not to eat too much, and
Hmm.
something that I
Mhm.
know I've personally discovered as I've moved toward intuitive eating and mindful eating over the years is that the holidays have almost no power over me anymore.
Mhm.
I enjoy them. I enjoy, like, especially around Christmas, the sweets. I definitely have a sweet tooth. I enjoy those things, but I also don't freak out about it.
Mhm.
I don't think, oh no, I'm never going to get these cookies again, because eventually I will again. I mean, there are some that just are Christmas cookies, and I don't eat those all
Mhm.
year. But
Mhm.
they're a treat and they're enjoyable. And then when they're gone, it's fine.
Right.
Because I mean, if I really, really wanted gingerbread cookies again, which I don't actually like, but I could get them again. It would be
Yeah.
fine. And then also, something that I've always thought was interesting was the whole feasting idea, and how people just eat until they're just sick,
Mhm.
because they're
Mhm.
afraid, like, oh, I'm not going to get any more of this good food, and
Yeah, or I'm gonna start my diet again tomorrow or on
right,
January 2nd, right?
right, exactly,
Yeah. Well, that's,
and
and that's the consequence of restriction. I mean,
it
that's
really
what you're
is.
describing is the and I think unfortunately, Dion, so many medical professionals are not aware of this. They may have
Hmm.
experienced it for themselves personally. As a physician, I was secretly yo-yo dieting, and I wish my patients, more success than I was having, but it didn't make me feel any better that they weren't having any more success than I was having. And I'm using success in those old terms because I see it very differently now.
Right.
But I think that many health professionals simply don't recognize how very ineffective restrictive dieting is for changing one's weight. And to your point, how distracting and really destructive it is, because in fact, we use up all this brain space worrying about what we're going to eat or what we did eat or hiding the evidence, right?
Right.
And in fact, we have the natural ability to make these decisions moment by moment. We don't need to obsess about everything that we eat. And if we now, initially, when people, and this might have been your experience too, initially, when people give up dieting rules, then they might find themselves overeating the foods that they've been missing. And so that can be very scary to people who are
Oh
new
yeah.
to intuitive eating and mindful eating. But when if they don't freak out and go back on their restrictive eating plan, what they discover is that food loses its power over us, just as you're describing. And so it goes back to being just food, which is
Hmm.
enjoyable, pleasurable. It can even be comforting. I mean, this is
Hmm.
the thing, is that food can just be such a beautiful part of our lives. It does not have to be the obsession and guilt inducing um, tool that it's become. I really, for myself, that freedom to eat what I love and the ability to love what I eat has been transformative. It's created so much space and joy in my life. And I, truly want that for everybody.
Absolutely. And with the holidays, I keep thinking too, what I've noticed for myself, and I think probably other people who eat intuitively and are paying attention to their bodies actually enjoy the holidays more as far as eating goes, because they're not often overeating to the
Mm-hmm.
point of uncomfortableness, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
might, but because there's this sort of freedom, I know I've noticed that I can, I'll eat and then I try a little bit of everything and I enjoy it. But I also, when I'm done, I'm done. And I don't feel like I need to continue to
Mm-hmm.
eat.
Right, because
And so,
because you no longer believe it's going to be taken away from you again the next time you
exactly.
start the diet.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, I look at my friends and family who are just like, oh, they feel
Mhm.
awful and they're so stuffed. And I find that I enjoy the holidays so much more because I'm not stuffed. I'm not,
Mhm.
in a food
Mhm.
coma. I'm able to, go do the other things that I want to do, or just enjoy, hanging out with friends and family. And it not just around the holidays, but in general has made life a lot easier because
Mhm.
I don't I don't worry about it too much. And then even when you're talking about eating food and being mindful around certain conditions like with diabetes, being able to relax around food around diabetes and recognize that there are other ways that one can support oneself,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
restricting just makes everything harder. Uh, Also provides this relaxation around certain conditions,
Hmm.
and those conditions that could be affected by stress, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so if you're a little less stressed because you're not freaking out about what you're going to eat, in the next few hours, or what you're not going to eat or what you're missing out on, I feel
Well,
like
and
also gives you an opportunity to manage conditions in a better way, in a fuller way.
yeah, exactly. And here's the thing is that, so a healthcare professional who might be listening to this might be thinking, but yeah, it's diabetes. People have to, be vigilant. Well, here's the thing, that doesn't work. Even when you have diabetes, it doesn't work long
Hmm.
term. And so what we need to be doing as healthcare professionals is look at what kinds of behaviors really do improve an individual's well-being
Hmm.
and are sustainable. And instead of um, opting for the quick fix, the short term, well, if you lose weight, lose 5 to 10% of your body weight and your health will improve. Well, it doesn't if you regain that 5 to 10% plus more. And also, so many of those studies are simply correlation studies.
Right.
If the improvement in health, is it really due to the weight change, or is it due to the behaviors that people adopted for the weight change?
Exactly.
And if it's due to a healthier, I'm using air quotes again, healthier lifestyle, then what's the point of adopting a healthier lifestyle that you can't sustain? So let's learn a way of including the foods that we love in our diet and eating them in a way that brings us pleasure and joy and leaves us feeling comfortable at the end. Again, as you alluded to, it's part
Hmm.
of normal eating to sometimes eat more than your body needs, and you might have discomfort sometimes after a really great meal or whatever. But you you don't have to beat yourself up. You don't have to starve yourself, or you don't have to start the cycle of, well, I've already blown it. I might as well keep
Right.
eating. It's just simply a wow, I feel really full now. And then you wait until you get hungry again. And when you're hungry again, you eat again. And it takes no more bandwidth out of your life than any other decision that you might make about sleep or personal hygiene or whatever else. I don't know why it's become such a moral, I don't know, it's just really interesting to me because because primarily because it doesn't work anyway.
Hmm.
And so we have to, I think, as healthcare professionals, I think we have to refocus. What is it that we're really wanting for our patients and our clients? And I think most of us would say we want them to reach a state of equilibrium, a state of optimal well-being where they can live their lives fully, in whatever body they have and manage whatever conditions they have without, feeling like it has to, totally take them out. Because otherwise, what is the point of trying to manage these conditions if our whole life is spent managing the conditions?
Right. Yeah, it's something that I've been talking to my patients about a lot lately is, well, for years now, is the idea of like not getting rid of the perfect in lieu of the good. And I feel like with healthism, a lot of that is, like everything has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, then it's not good enough. And you might as well just quit. And so finding like a middle ground, and I've kind of moved away from the word balance because I don't really like it. Because I feel like
Hmm.
nothing's ever in balance. But somebody used the word harmony the other day, and I really liked
Hmm.
that because in a harmony, every note's in a different place, but when they're all put together, it works, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's kind of how I've started thinking about health in general, eating, movement, sleep, all the stuff that, we need to live. That sometimes, you're going to spend a little more time on one thing because, it just needs a little more support and the rest of them are fine. They're
Mhm.
chugging
Yep.
along. And what's going to need more support at any given time is going to change. Like if you're, have a new child, and, sleep is going to be pretty important. Um, if you're not feeling well, then being able to either eat or not eat depending on what your body tells you to do, or if you're in pain, maybe movement's a challenge. um so spending our time, instead of just trying to be perfect in everything, uh focusing our attention on the things that maybe need just a little extra support. And that includes with health too, with our with we if we have conditions that need a little more attention, parts of our bodies that just need a little bit more support than other parts. And everybody's got something different that needs a little more support than other
Mhm.
bits. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, we
and
talk
having
about.
that headspace to
Mhm.
do that is
Mhm. Mhm.
really important.
Yeah, in the mindful eating cycle, I mentioned that the last decision point is where do I invest my energy? And I think the outdated diet and exercise model, the eat less, exercise more model, focuses on energy output as calorie burning and exercise. And I think, a much bigger perspective is more beneficial. So looking, at how we're caring for our body, mind, heart, and spirit, all of them. And again, you're right. It's not when I use see, and you're right. You said the balance is, because I'd written about this as well. That balance is sort of this. Ooh, but that's because immediately we start thinking of a balance scale where everything has to be
Hmm.
equal. This impossible, never going to happen kind of
No.
situation, right? Like
Hmm.
it's really truly and having the flexibility to be able to make micro adjustments to manage whatever is going on in that moment. And that's really what mindfulness is all about. That's what mindful eating is all about, is it's having the awareness of my physical sensations, my thoughts, my feelings at any given time, so that I can make a decision for myself right now. I'm not thinking 20 years down the road, if I don't eat this cake, maybe I my diabetes won't get me, right? We're thinking
Right.
right now, okay, am I hungry? If I am, is this what I want? If I'm not, is this what I want anyway? We're just
Hmm.
making decisions in the present moment. And we do the same thing with our self-care behaviors, having the flexibility to make decisions right now without everything being about trying to attain some idealized version
Hmm.
of health and beauty and chronic disease management or whatever the situation is. Again, like you said, it's not it's not using the outside world to set the bar, but this is really an inside out approach.
Right. And it's not even, and we're not, and I want to be clear that we're not saying just like throw away all potential healthy advice and just it's a free for all, because
No.
that's not true either.
Mm-mm.
It's more about recognizing, there is some thought to the future,
Mm-hmm.
and your future health. So, making sure that you're eating your fruits and vegetables and, that kind of thing is also important. But then also recognizing that, if you want a piece of cake at your birthday party, or
Or not a
or
birthday
not.
party
Yeah, you don't
on
have to do
a
that either.
Wednesday.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Well, and
If you're
even
just like, I want a cookie, you can have it, but you know, it's a combination of those two things.
yeah,
You know.
we in the what decision point, we teach a sort of a series of questions. Again, this is an inside out approach. So it's all about self inquiry, about making
Hmm.
decisions for myself. And I won't go into it in great detail, but just to sort of give people an idea of how you can use what you and I are talking about. The three questions in order are: what do I want to eat? What do I need? to eat and what do I have to eat. So, what do I
Yes.
want is really about considering, is there something specific that I'm really in the mood for, something I'm really craving, or something that would really taste good to me? Because I think most of us have had the experience of not letting ourselves eat what we really wanted for whatever reason, and then overeating something else or eating a bunch of other things and eventually getting around to what we really wanted in the first place. So, why do that when we can make a decision for ourselves about what to eat? And at least take that into consideration. And if there isn't something that you really, really, really want, then make the healthiest choice you can that won't leave you feeling deprived. And then, of
Absolutely.
course, so what do I need is about considering, well, what are my health needs? If I have diabetes or pre-diabetes, what do I know about carbohydrates? And, what observations have I made about how certain amounts of carbohydrates affect my blood sugar? And perhaps, I know that certain foods, if I eat too much of them, leave me feeling groggy in the afternoon or sluggish, and I don't want to feel sluggish this afternoon. So maybe there's allergies or conditions that run in our families that we're mindful of. And so what do I need is about considering all of the implications of the foods that I choose. And then here's the word balance again. It's about balancing what are my wants and what are my needs for this moment, for this meal. Once I have a clear idea of what I'm in the mood for and what my body needs, then I go to see what do I have? What are my options? And what can I choose from all of the available options that are a good fit for what I want and need right this minute? And so it's not about obsessing about making every meal a perfect meal. It's about having a general awareness, a general mindfulness about the choices that I'm making in order to take care of myself, not to check some box, but to literally take care of myself.
Right. And then I just want to bring up the idea that sometimes you don't have access to what you want or sometimes even what you need, and sometimes what you have is what you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of the times when we think about this, a lot of us are coming from a place of financial privilege, so we can mostly get what we want and what we need. But just because you don't have that access doesn't mean that you can't, do what you can with what you have.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Which
and
again
sometimes you just do.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's such an important point because,
Mhm.
again, diet culture sets up this idealized picture of what healthy eating should look like. And
Mhm.
that is not practical, or it may not even be culturally appropriate for everybody. I think we have to have a much broader view on what eating looks like from one individual to another. It needs to be a very, very individualized approach. And even for those who have, plenty of choice, there are going to be times when what you want or what you need just simply aren't one of the choices.
Right.
You're at somebody's house, or, you're eating at a banquet, whatever. I mean, there's going to be times when you're just not going to have that. And I think it's also important to recognize that satisfaction from eating is a combination of both physical satiety, but also enjoyment of your food. And if you end up with food that you don't really like for whatever reason, noticing, gosh, I'm not really loving this food, so that you can tell yourself, you know what, I'm just going to, eat enough so that I'm not hangry anymore. And then the next
Right.
time I eat, I'm going to make an effort to choose something that is really satisfying to me. Because otherwise, ironically, we can end up overeating food that we don't even like simply because we're not feeling satisfied by it. It's
Right.
just kind of interesting when you really become mindful of this whole process of how we have all of these little unconscious built-in habits that, once you become conscious of them, it completely changes the way you respond to different situations.
Right. I keep thinking of I was talking to Lucy Aframore one time and we were talking about this, and so she was saying, what would you, if you're hungry, like where would you start thinking about what would you want? And I'm thinking, well, do I want something hot? Do I want something cold? And she's like, okay. And so, we talked through that, and then she says, but in the end, if all I've got is beans on toast, then I'm
Mm-hmm.
having beans on toast. It doesn't matter what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a part of me that also wants to caution people to, even as we take on mindful eating, to also not make it a perfection in and of itself, right? To
Mm-hmm.
feel like that you have to, somehow do mindful eating perfectly,
Oh, it's so
because I know
easy.
that
There's
that could be like a temptation as well, right?
oh,
You're like,
so
um,
true.
and
So
so,
it's
and
so
recognizing
easy
that
to
sometimes you have what you have, and it
yeah.
doesn't matter what you want or what you need. You have beans on toast, and that's what you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
have for lunch. um, and then, and like you said, if you're at a place where you're at a dinner and you don't have much choice over what food you have, eating at that point you might be just like, okay, I'm eating for fuel. I'm, again, like you said, making sure I'm not hangry. I'm not going to worry about it too much right now, and I don't always have to have perfectly what I need, what I want, or even what I need, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I just food in general is what I have. And not trying to be too anxious about that, because if you're spending 100, all of your time, you're no longer dieting, but now you're spending all your time trying to be a perfect mindful eater.
Oh, yeah, it's
Then
so
that also
easy.
can be, a
It's
little
so easy. And again,
overwhelming.
this is diet culture that's
Yeah.
trained our brains to think that we have to do everything perfectly and we have to have all these rules and we have to have all these, and it's very easy to turn mindful eating or intuitive eating into a diet. Oh, I can only eat when I'm hungry. I
Yes.
have to stop when I'm full. It's just sort of a habit of mind to make things rigid instead of being
Hmm.
flexible. So that's probably the one tip that I would have for everybody is just be as flexible as you can, aware and flexible, because
Right.
it's the rigidity that I think really becomes a challenge for many of us and leads to a lot of problems. And, we just don't, yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Five
and I
books
would like to
later.
and I would like to point out, just as a CYA thing, um, for some people, intuitive eating may not work for, like, especially if you have been had a severe restricting disorder for a long time, or even for a short time. But sometimes, it for certain groups of people, it's actually really necessary to have some external structure initially, until you start getting back into your body and start understanding what you can, and what your body needs and doesn't need. So, just keeping that in mind, for some people, intuitive eating is not the best thing right away. Uh, Specifically thinking of restrictive eating disorders.
Well, you bring up eating disorders, and I want to just touch on binge eating disorder for a few minutes, though,
Okay.
because I think that's a really under recognized eating disorder in among healthcare professionals. I think,
Agreed.
given that it's relatively new, 2013 was when it was added to the DSM. And I think, I know when I was in my medical practice, I had never heard of that term. We may have sometimes called it compulsive overeating. I think it's very common these days for people to say that they're addicted to food when some of them may have actual binge eating disorder. So, and I think the other thing that's relevant to this discussion is that, well, a couple things about it. One is that not all people who have binge eating disorder are going to be in a higher weight category,
Right.
and vice versa. By no means are people who are in a larger body, do all of them have binge eating disorder? And I think that we just need to really separate eating disorders from body size. As because certainly there are people um, who meet the criteria from an eating perspective for anorexia, but because they're in a larger body, aren't being diagnosed. And in fact, they might even be prescribed the very behaviors that they're struggling with. So,
Right.
again, I think, separating out weight, just, not using weight to assess, not, I shouldn't say it that way, but not, not assuming that we know anything about somebody's health or behaviors based on their weight is helpful, not just with various other chronic diseases, but it's also really important when looking at potential eating disorders.
Right.
So I think with binge eating disorder, oftentimes there is a component of restrictive eating. It's not
Right.
always the cause of binge eating disorders, but there's often a component of restrictive eating. And I think, what you were referring to before, in fact, with binge eating disorder, people, if they do have a restrictive phase to their binge eating, the moving away from restriction and really learning the skills and things that, along the lines of an internally driven process, can be absolutely life changing for
Mm-hmm.
people. We did a study on our mindful eating for binge eating program. My co-author, Dr. Carrie Anderson, when she was getting her doctorate, did a study where she admitted people who met had a binge eating scale score of that was considered severe binge eating. So they were allowed into the study, and by the end of the 10-week program, they were all in the non-binging category. And then a year later, the vast majority of them were still in a non-binging category.
That's
The
amazing.
It is amazing. And here's something that you'll find interesting is there were a few people who had jumped back up into binge eating. And do you know what the common theme was? They'd
Restriction?
all, yes, exactly. Bingo, bingo. Now,
Yeah.
hard to know which came first, but it was highly correlated. And so I think that's something that we really have to sort of keep in mind, for any clinicians who are listening. If you have a higher weight patient, just even if you're not on board with Hayes yet, even if you're not totally on board with this idea of a weight neutral approach, I would just beg you to not prescribe weight loss for every person that comes in your door with a BMI of whatever, because I think to the name of your podcast, first, do no harm. And I think prescribing weight loss, prescribing restrictive eating, does harm.
I agree.
I bet you
Although
do.
everybody knows I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that all of us can definitely make moves towards mindful eating, and not just mindful eating, but mindful movement, and um being able to take care of ourselves and find our healthiest, or not even healthiest, but like a healthier space for our bodies um without a lot of anxiety. But it
Hmm.
might take some of us longer than others. I always suggest, finding a therapist that is really well trained in all of this, because it's really helpful. If you need a dietitian that's also well trained in this, I think that can be also very helpful. So I do
Hmm.
recommend and encourage people to get help as you move out of diet culture. Uh, it's not easy.
It's not.
And yeah, and you're not going to lose weight necessarily. So
Mm-hmm.
some people do, some people don't, some people gain weight. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to try this mindful eating stuff and see if I can get healthier, but in your mind you're thinking I'm going to lose weight, and then you don't think it's not working,
Mm.
um, because you might be feeling better, and you might actually be doing better, but you might not have changed your weight at all. So I always try to
Well,
remind people of that.
you know what I say to people is, um, we want to practice self-care because we care about ourselves, not so we'll care about ourselves, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's really just taking a much broader view of our well-being and what that can look like. And similarly, you may or may not lose weight, but that's not the reason to do this. The reason to do it is to free up space in your life so that you can actually live your life and so that you can find a pattern of behaviors and choices and lifestyle that is sustainable and perfect for you, not for anybody else, not to
Yes.
fit some definition, but it fits for you in your lifestyle. And that really, that does take time. To your point, it's not easy, especially because we're so indoctrinated in diet culture. It's hard to recognize diet culture. I run a mindful eating support community online, and one of the participants, um, she's just like laughing because she said, I did not think that I had that many restrictive beliefs, but many of the questions she had about how to air quote do mindful eating were very much around turning it into rules, and she caught it herself. I didn't have to even tell her. She caught it as soon as she'd written her question. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I can see it now." And I think that's, it's just how our brains have been trained that there's a right way and a wrong way. Psychologists call this dichotomous thinking, this
Mhm.
all or nothing, good or bad, right or wrong. And that's the way that many of us have been trained. And so we see mindful eating the same way. I'm doing it. Am I doing it right? Am I what should I do now? And
Right.
that's, and it's hard. It does take support. It takes a knowledgeable person to guide you through that process, especially if these are long-standing behaviors and if this is really new to you.
Right.
But it's so worth it. Oh my gosh, it's just amazing the difference it can make in your life.
It really is. It's so nice to not have to freak out about everything all the time
Mm-hmm.
and just to be able
Yeah.
to relax and, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned movement. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
rather than turning exercise into punishment for eating or for earning the right to eat or for paying penance for eating something that you shouldn't have, right? It's
Mhm.
about moving your body in a respectful way. And if movement hasn't been part of your life previously, my suggestion is to do the least amount of exercise that you can joyfully and consistently.
Yep.
So, set the bar lower. Don't keep raising the bar. Don't keep beating yourself up with how much you should be exercising or how many times a week you should be going to the gym if you don't even like the gym.
Right.
Figure out what you can do that you like and make it enjoyable because that's what becomes sustainable for you is something that you find joy and that you recognize that it feels good in your body. It doesn't feel like it's punitive.
Right. Exactly. I try to think back about before PE ruined my love of exercise.
Hmm.
And I try
Are you, I don't know if you're as old as I am, but I remember the Presidential
Yeah.
Award of Fitness.
Yes. I
Oh
think we're
my
about the
gosh.
same age actually. And
Yeah.
and yeah, and I mean that thing ruined me. I hated that test.
Oh.
And my gym teacher through elementary school was just awful. And just treated like, if you weren't naturally super athletic. And I was moderately athletic. I mean, I was coordinated and but I was also a fat kid, so and I
Mhm.
also had asthma, so like the run was always awful for me. Uh,
Yep.
but I think back prior to that, and when I was little, and I remember Linda Carter was Wonder Woman, right? And I
Hmm.
was obsessed. Just such just so amazing. And so I would run when I was a little kid, and I would pretend that I was Wonder Woman, and I was going super super fast.
Hmm.
And I loved it, and I would just run forever. Like, well, maybe not forever, but I just run around, and I had so much fun. And for me, I mean, of course, I was getting exercise. I was running around, but it wasn't exercise for me. I was just running because I was Wonder Woman, and I was going super fast.
Right. Right.
Um, And so now when I exercise, and it honestly, that has been the hardest for me. Eating was much easier to deal with.
Mhm.
And to be able to relax around, for me, exercise has been the hardest thing because it has just always reminded me of punishment.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
and even exercise that I like, I often revert back to thinking of it as, okay, I have to go do this, and that
Hmm.
has been definitely the biggest challenge for me, is just to start enjoying certain movements and not thinking of them as exercise,
Right, right,
even if
right.
technically they are, and trying to
Well,
get
and
back to that running as Wonder Woman feeling again.
yeah, well, running doesn't never appeals to me any either.
Well, when I was a little
I
kid, it was great. When I was older,
yeah.
not so much. But
Well, no, and I remember the same thing. I did, I my brother was really athletic, and so and I was, again, the chubby kid with the freckles and the, not going to be able to compete on some level. I had no interest in competitive athletics at all. And so for a long time, I just sort of I believed that I wasn't athletic. It wasn't until I discovered yoga, which for me, it's not for everybody, but for me, it really uses my body's natural flexibility. And I was able to build strength. And it certainly helped me uh, rid myself of some of my perfectionism and comparing and judging, which is something I needed to work on for myself. And then, discovering that I love being out in nature. So hiking for me isn't exercise, it's being out in nature,
right.
And now we're playing pickleball. Who knew, right? And so all of a sudden I think to myself, gosh, I actually really truly love I look forward to it. I have friends I do these things with and all this,
Mhm.
and it's such a different relationship to moving my body. And honestly, I actually get irritated if I ever have a teacher or somebody who mentions calories or oh, it's the holiday. I just actually get irritated by that. So,
Oh,
you
I've
know,
I've left
oh,
I've left places that done. I was doing water aerobics for a long time, and I had one teacher who was great, never brought any of that up. Um, and then I was going to this other class that the teacher always brought it up. Like, how many
mm,
calories are you burning? Let's look good on our suits. Blah blah blah. And I remember I went to that class, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. And every time, I mean, the whole class was ruined. I just was, in there doing my water aerobics going, oh, I'm so mad
yeah.
at this lady. And I left one day and I was like, I just hate going to that class. And I thought to myself, you don't have to.
Right.
It was like
Right.
this revelation. I was like, I don't have to go to
Oh,
that class.
no.
I'm enjoying the water aerobics at this other class, and yes, it will take away a class a week, but I don't care
It's not good for
because it was
me.
so
You
stressful,
know, what I'll do is, if we remember, I'll send you a link to a one-page handout that I wrote for fitness trainers about this exact topic, kind of some,
Perfect.
some ground rules. You can put it in your show notes if you want, if people have
Yes.
something that they want to share with their with their instructors or fitness professionals in your life, or if you're a fitness professional, because I think that people they think they're motivating, they think they're helping, but what it's actually doing is it's undermining the development of a healthy relationship with our bodies when we turn, exercise and movement and something that, as you described so beautifully, was totally natural and fun as a child into a way to earn the right to eat.
Yeah.
It really is counterproductive.
Agreed. Well, I think on that's a pretty good note to end on. Just the flexibility around food and movement, and again, if you are interested in learning more about this from either a provider point of view or from just a living your life point of view, there's I will have in the show notes links to all of Dr. May's stuff and books, and certainly can always contact me. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me, or coming to your computer and talking to me.
Yep.
It was really great to talk to you. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's just that the purpose of learning to eat in a way that's respectful of yourself is really just to free your energy up so you can live that big life you crave. Let's not turn, nutrition into a weapon. It's really just a tool to use to help you live your life fully. So it takes time and be patient and gentle with yourself as you're learning to change your mindset around this stuff, but it's so worth it.
It really is. Thank you again. The theme music was composed and performed by Galen Davis. Show art was created by Stacy Bias. If you enjoyed the podcast or learned something new, please subscribe as it helps amplify this important message. Also, please feel free to share with friends and colleagues.